Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. A special guest joins us, joining Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at the press briefing today, and the latest from the White House on the government shutdown. Major arrests as ICE takes suspected child predators and human traffickers off the streets, and Missouri activates the National Guard to assist with rounding up illegal immigrants. Part of a high-rise apartment in New York City collapses. Video footage from nearby residents captures the aftermath. A nuclear plant in Ukraine is left without power after recent attacks. The dangers this poses and how authorities are responding. President Trump vows to protect the state of Qatar against external attacks, what his latest executive order covers.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for staying with us. Vice President J.D. Vance joining the press secretary in the White House briefing room today. We now go live to NTD's Mari Otsu, who was just at the briefing. Good afternoon, Mari. What did the vice president say about the government shutdown?
Don, good afternoon. Vice President J.D. Vance is just saying that he doesn't think it's going to be a long shutdown. The vice president, in his surprise appearance in the briefing room this afternoon, says that he's seen evidence that moderate Democrats are, quote, cracking and might side with Republicans and vote to open the government. Vance emphasizes that the Republicans offered a clean continuing resolution that Democrats voted for 13 times in the past, but rather than passing that clean CR, they are trying to bring back what Vance calls taxpayer-funded health care for illegal immigrants, which is a charge that Democrats dispute. Take a look.
The political leadership, not every Democrat nationwide, but the political leadership of their party has got it into their heads that the only way to be compassionate is to be compassionate to illegal aliens rather than American citizens. We believe that the American people's government exists for the American people.
The vice president also says that if you look back at what Democrats have been saying about illegal immigration 10 to 20 years ago, they would be placed on the, quote, MAGA right based on their rhetoric around illegal immigration, implying that the shift to the left has been recent. But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer this morning says this.
But the reality here, and let's be honest about the politics, is that Chuck Schumer is terrified she's going to get a primary challenge from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The reason why the American people's government is shut down is because Chuck Schumer is listening to the far-left radicals in his own party because he's terrified of a primary challenge.
So that's Vance arguing that Schumer is taking his stance for political reasons. And during the briefing, the president actually posted Truth Social saying that he'll be meeting with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping in 4 weeks, assuring American farmers that he'll be talking about soybeans and keeping them in his mind during talks with the CCP leader. Don, back to you.
Mari, thank you. Day one of government shutdown. Senate Democrats blocked a procedural vote to reconsider a continuing resolution to reopen the government. Our Washington correspondent, Luis Eduardo Martinez, has the latest on the story.
Republicans thought that they could barrel us into a shutdown because they didn't want to protect the health care of the American people. Well, now they've seen they can't bully us, they can't barrel us. They don't have the votes to push their partisan bill through that did nothing to protect American health care.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has maintained his maximalist demands despite that members of his conference have already shown opposition to hold government funding hostage.
We were elected to solve the problems of this country, not make them worse. And that's exactly what Donald Trump and his Republican henchmen are seeking to do.
It is now a messaging war, and despite the fact that Congress holds the power of the purse, Democrats are blaming President Trump for the shutdown. Republicans maintain their willingness to negotiate with Democrats their extension of Affordable Care Act healthcare tax credits that they are demanding.
This is not the time to take the American people hostage. The ACA credits don't run out until December. But the best way to do that is to open the government and let's get back to this thing called regular order so we can have those debates. We can have those committee hearings. We can have those negotiations.
Senate Republicans are focusing their messaging on moderate Democrats, calling on them to vote for the continuing resolution to reopen government. 4 more Democrats are needed to do so.
I actually don't think it's going to be that long of a shutdown. This is a pure guess from the Vice President of the United States because I think you already saw some evidence that moderate Democrats are cracking a little bit. They understand the fundamental illogic of this.
Chuck Schumer, at the behest of a bunch of liberal, far-left activist groups, has walked his Democrat colleagues into a boxed canyon.
The continuing resolution that House Republicans passed and Senate Republicans support extends levels of government funding set by Democrats during the Biden administration. Republicans have also chosen not to enact the spending cuts proposed by the Department of Government Efficiency. Ultimately, Democrats have already voted for current levels of government funding 13 times in the past. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Joining us to discuss the government shutdown is Bobby Ann Cox, fellow of the Brownstone Institute and legal analyst. She's also a civil rights attorney. Bobby Ann, always great to have you. Thank you for joining us. To start off, what, if anything, can be done legally to force the government to reopen?
So technically, there's nothing that can be done as far as a court, a lawsuit to pressure the government to reopen. Technically, this is something that falls 100% within Congress's power. You know, Congress funds our government. They have failed to do that as of today. And so the shutdown begins today. And, if there was a lawsuit brought, the courts just don't have the power to force Congress to vote on something and pass a law to fund the government. This goes directly to separation of powers. 3 branches of government, the judges and the courts, that's the judicial branch. They don't have the power. These are supposed to be 3 co-equal branches. They don't have the power to force Congress, which is our legislative branch, to do something that Congress is not willing to do. So technically, from a legal standpoint, there's nothing that can be done to force Congress to vote and make amends on the issues that are outstanding. This has to work itself out in the manner of, negotiations between the both sides of the aisle in the Senate. The U.S. House of Representatives did pass a continuing resolution last week to fund the government through the end of November. But unfortunately, the continuing resolution has not passed in the United States Senate. And this is why we are where we are today with the government shutdown starting to happen.
And as well, Bobby Ann, we heard even just earlier in the press briefing that the Trump administration is planning to lay off some workers, and some groups are already suing over this, right? How much freedom does the administration have in terms of layoffs during the shutdown?
Yeah, so the administration has to be careful on what they do and how they do it. It's not impossible to lay people off during a federal shutdown of the government, but they do have to go by certain procedures when they're doing that. And in essence, what the government would need to do is called a reduction in force. So if agencies had plans prior to today, prior to the shutdown beginning, if they had plans in place on how to reduce their force, meaning how to get rid of certain positions and fire certain people within their agencies, if they already had those plans laid out, then technically they could do layoffs during the shutdown. If they didn't have a plan in place and they just, wake up this morning and the funding is stopping and they say, we want to fire everybody in our agency, unfortunately, they can't do that. You have to follow the rules. We do have regulations that are specific to how this has to happen. And we have a federal law as well. So, yeah, they do have to be careful what they're doing, how they're doing it. The short answer is it's not impossible to reduce the workforce during a government shutdown at the federal level, but they just have to follow the right rules to do so.
Right. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, lawsuits are already coming. How are courts impacted during a shutdown?
Yeah, so federal courts will be impacted during a government shutdown at the federal level. State courts operate separately. They are funded by their states directly. So the state courts are not affected during a federal government shutdown. But the federal courts would be affected. I read one article today that said that they do have sufficient funding in their reserves to operate for a couple of weeks. So, the federal courts won't shut down today immediately. But what tends to happen, because we have seen shutdowns of the federal government about 20 times in the past 50 years, what tends to happen is if the Congress, that both sides of Congress can't come together and pass a continuing resolution or fund the government, then when the appropriations stop coming and the money stops coming, then what happens is things like the courts and other agencies, they will start to cut back their services and they'll go to just what is crucial and emergency services. So in the case of federal courts, for example, the criminal cases would take first priority if they have to start scaling back their services. And then the civil cases would take second priority to the criminal cases. So it is going to be affecting the court system, particularly at the federal level. But we don't know how long this is going to last. We've had shutdowns at the federal government that have lasted, a day. And we've had, the longest federal shutdown was, I believe, 35 days. That was under President Trump in his first administration. But we've had shutdowns under President Obama and President Clinton and, before that. So this is not unheard of. Unfortunately, it's something that has happened, like I said, about a half a dozen times or a couple dozen times over the past 50 years. So we have to see how long this is going to take for them to negotiate.
Would you say government shutdowns, are they a symptom of a deeper problem in government? I mean, is this something that the founding fathers considered in structuring it?
Well, so, the government, the way that it's happened these past 50 years with these shutdowns, it really came about starting in the late 1970s because of the way that the budget, the federal budget, is created and passed. Prior to 1977, we didn't really see these shutdowns like this because of the way that the budget was created prior to 1977. So I'm not sure that this is something that was thought of by the founding fathers, 250 years ago or almost 250 years ago. I think this is more an issue of, modern day politics. And what we see here is, two political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, cannot agree on what they want to fund and how much they want to fund. So, in this particular instance, we're hearing from the Republicans that the Democrats are not wanting to negotiate. They want, illegal aliens to be able to have free health care on the backs of the taxpayers. And then we hear the Democrats saying that the Republicans want to get rid of, Medicaid and Medicare and health insurance. And, there's a bit of mudslinging going on and a lot of finger pointing going on. But this is, it's a systemic problem where they can't negotiate and come to a logical and amicable resolution. And, they're not affected. I really want the audience to understand this. The members of Congress are not affected during a government shutdown. They keep getting their paychecks. They make $174,000 a year, each one of them, and their paychecks keep flowing during a government shutdown. So, where is the impetus for them to come together and pass either a CR, a continuing resolution, or a budget that funds the government? There really isn't much incentive if they keep getting their paychecks. So, this is something that is a big problem. And like I said, we've seen it many times before. And it's because the Republicans and the Democrats can't put their differences aside and come to a logical resolution, which ultimately helps the American people. So it is disappointing when this type of thing happens.
Well, I would argue, hopefully, that the incentive is the interest of the American people for lawmakers to come together to, to make sure that this doesn't always happen. But do you think there is some way where the government can become more functional and to better serve the interests of the American people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this is, like I said, since 1977, shutdowns have happened about 20 times. So it is rather often, if you think about it. But it's got to have a positive outcome. We basically, this is a negotiation tactic. Both sides are pointing the finger at the other side, saying, you're being impossible. You're not negotiating. You need to come to the table, sit down, and have some serious talks. So, what ends up happening? You have the politicians on the right and on the left, bickering with each other. They're still getting paid the whole time. And the federal workers, which can include, our military, but certainly those who work in federal agencies, the federal court systems, these people will shortly stop getting their paychecks when their reserves and the funding runs out. So, it is a frustrating situation, and we do need Congress to pass a law that funds the government. And so this has to become a less common occurrence. And I think how we do that is by making sure we've got people representing us in Congress who actually are for the people, understand the real life consequences when the paychecks stop coming. That is a key here. If career politicians are the ones that are running the country, they're the ones in the U.S. Senate, they're the ones in the House of Representatives, and they don't understand what it means to run a small business. They don't understand what it means to live paycheck to paycheck. They don't understand what it means to, sign the front of a check and not just the back of a check. Then that's a big problem, because then you have the voters, the American people, who suffer as a result of that. So I think one wonderful way that we can try to help resolve the situation is for the members of Congress, particularly in this instance, the U.S. Senate, to hear from their constituents and hear from the American people. Whether you call them or you email them or you write them a letter, they need to hear what you think and what you want, because they are supposed to be representing us. And the fact that they continue to get paid their paychecks during this whole thing makes them a little bit more detached from the situation and the seriousness of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, you're right in that hopefully this doesn't become a common occurrence. And I was just joking with my guests yesterday that I can't even say how many times I've reported on the possibility of a government shutdown each and every year. Well, okay, Bobby Ann, I think that should do it for this conversation today. Thank you again for coming on.
Yes, thanks you.
Tense moments at Utah State University hours before the first Turning Point USA event in the state since Charlie Kirk's assassination. Utah State in Logan is 2 hours north of Utah Valley University, where Kirk was killed last month. Law enforcement yesterday detonated a suspicious device found on campus. Here are the details.
Authorities evacuated Utah State's old main building after an employee spotted someone place a device under a tree outside. A bomb squad later determined it was not explosive but detonated out of caution. The university says it does not believe it was an intentional threat or related to the event. The scare came amid heightened security for Turning Point USA's event, the first in Utah since founder Charlie Kirk was assassinated at Utah Valley University earlier this month. Thousands of students and supporters packed Utah State's arena to hear from speakers including Governor Spencer Cox and former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz. Wellness podcaster with Turning Point Alex Clark kicked off the event with a message.
I'm not here to eulogize Charlie Kirk. I am here to pass the torch on to every single one of you.
Security was visibly tight. drones overhead, metal detectors at every entrance, and tactical teams on site. Despite the scare and heavy security, the night was less about mourning and more about carrying on the movement Charlie Kirk started.
We are witnessing the most powerful conservative youth movement in the history of America.
Utah Governor Spencer Cox urged people across the political spectrum to treat each other with respect.
He very passionately believed that anger never persuades and that hostility never convinces anyone. Peacemaking is not soft. It's the hardest thing you can do.
For many in the crowd, Kirk was a voice of truth, whose death has only strengthened their resolve.
I love that Charlie had that impact on so many people, and so many people have come out of the woodwork and declared who they are religiously, and I think it's a phenomenal thing.
Turning Point has seen tens of thousands of requests to start new chapters across schools nationwide.
3 suspected Hamas members have been arrested by German police in Berlin. Germany's Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt said the suspects had been under surveillance for months.
We have also done everything possible to prevent this planned attack. This has also been successful. The whole situation demonstrates that the theory sometimes put forward that Germany is a safe haven for terrorism is incorrect. We are clearly a place of action for terrorists. That is why we must always be well prepared to defend ourselves against them.
German prosecutors say the 3 were allegedly acquiring weapons to target Israeli or Jewish institutions. Weapons and ammunition were also seized today. Dobrindt said also it is the only clear an attack that was planned. It has not been determined who or what would have been the target. The 3 arrested have been charged with membership in a foreign terrorist organization and preparing an act of violence endangering the state. President Trump announced a deal with Pfizer to reduce its drug prices. Joining us to discuss is Jeffrey Tucker, the founder and president of Brownstone Institute. He's also the author of the book Life After Lockdown. Good afternoon to you, Jeffrey. Do you think this could finally lower drug prices for Americans?
It's a start. Pfizer is the least popular of all the drug companies among Trump's base. And so I think maybe he had to get the hard part over with first. So there was some uncomfortable optics in the White House with the head of Pfizer meeting with Kennedy and Dr. Oz and Trump and so on. But generally, the import of what he's doing here is highly significant. The backdrop here is that in the U.S., drugs are sometimes 10 times more expensive, twice and 10 times more expensive than the same drug. And just across the borders. And every American who's traveled to the UK, Mexico, or Canada, or the Far East, knows this. They could get the same drugs vastly cheaper in foreign countries, and it raises the question why. And the reason is that the U.S. government has not negotiated these prices downwards. So it ends up that the U.S. is subsidizing everybody else in the world, and the drug companies are perfectly happy with this. Well, he put out an executive order in consultation with his public health team earlier this year that just said, look, the U.S. is not going to pay any more for these drug prices, meaning Medicare and Medicaid, which feeds into what the private insurers are willing to pay, which is how these costs are determined, is how prices are determined. He said, we're not going to pay any more than the lowest price in other favored nations around the world. And so that was a shock. This is something the Democrats have wanted to get done for probably decades, and Trump did it against the recommendations of Wall Street and so on and so on. But I think it was a wonderful step because the pricing system as it existed doesn't make any sense. So this is part of that larger fabric. So Pfizer was the first company to come in and agree to the terms, and everybody else is going to follow Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and all the other pharmaceutical companies. And with that, Trump is getting agreements to invest in the U.S. instead of always making his pharmaceutical products abroad, which is actually a very serious problem that the U.S. has right now. Is we essentially don't have any pharmaceutical manufacturing in the U.S. So he's trying to do all these things at the same time, And these are extraordinary steps. Like I say, people have been trying to get this done for decades, and Trump's the first one to actually do it.
Can I ask you what you think as to what is the likely long-term consequences of most favored nation pricing on U.S. consumer drugs?
It's definitely going to lower the prices. Now, are they going to get as cheap as they have been abroad, or are prices abroad going to go up, and we're going to meet somewhere in the middle? I think it's an empirical question. My guess is that we're going to see more of equilibrium pricing across all world pharmaceuticals. That world is coming to us soon, which is exactly what free trade theory would predict. David Ricardo in the 19th century used to talk about the law of one price. That under a free trade system, everything would tend to cost the same amount in all countries in the world. So I think that's what's going to happen. Prices are going to go up in foreign countries. They're going to probably come down in the U.S. So it's good for Americans, no question. But you're going to pay the same price in the U.S. that you could get that drug in Sweden or the UK or Mexico? Probably not immediately, but it is going to lower the cost of prescription medications. And that's going to be very good for American household budgets. Unfortunately, the U.S. takes more pharmaceuticals and drugs than any other country per capita by far anywhere in the world. So that's highly regrettable. This is a serious problem that RFK is dealing with. But in any case, it remains true that this is the situation in the U.S. So it's going to be this kinds of change is what's necessary to lower the burden on the household budget and make the market function somewhat more normally. I think this is probably good news for consumers. Long term, RFK is working on doing something about reducing the addiction that Americans have and dependency that Americans have on pharmaceutical products.
So it is true that President Trump is doing a lot on this front, but is there a sense of temporariness in relying on executive actions in this situation? Can you talk about what role does structural policy reform play in addressing drug pricing?
Well, you've put your finger on something it's been a problem since the executive order started coming out earlier this year. The question is, well, how do we make these changes permanent? And that's why you need a Republican Congress to mirror all these changes in legislation. And this one's particularly problematic because essentially the pharmaceutical companies don't like what Trump is doing here. They prefer the status quo as it is because America's where the money is. America's which is the country with the generous health insurance programs that are paying unbelievable amounts of money for pharmaceutical products. Pharmaceutical companies like that. The pharmaceutical companies also have very big lobbies that are lobbying that lobby Congress, and many of these politicians feel a sense of dependency on their donations. So it's going to be hard to get this stuff mirrored in legislation. But your intuition is correct, and it's not just for this executive order. It's for all of his executive orders. They all need to be reflected in legislation. That's a major job for the White House right now, to get the Congress to go along with making these changes permanent.
Okay, Jeffrey, can we just get your comments on one more thing? How do you respond to the idea that lower drug prices will stifle innovation?
Yeah, I don't believe that. Their monopoly profits in the U.S. are so gigantic. One thing that they could do to save money and put it into R&D would be to stop squandering so much money on the advertising industry that is supporting so much media, right? So apparently that restriction's gone into place already. I think the FDA is going to demand a little more scrupulosity from pharmaceutical companies in explaining all the possible side effects of their drugs on their television advertising and newspaper advertising, which is going to make it much more difficult for them to advertise. So you take some of that advertising budget, put into research and development, I think we're going to be good. The other thing is, I just have to say, not as a medical professional, there's so many generics that are already available that are good drugs. We don't always need a patented innovation in order to guarantee health. Sometimes what we need is just better lifestyles, the use of proven generics, and good old-fashioned home remedies can go a long way too. We need to rediscover those things. That's a subject I'm going to be writing about in Epoch Times, I think, in the coming days.
All right, looking forward to that. It's always great to talk to you, Jeffrey. Thank you very much.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.